everyone. I am back. I told you it'd be soon and not 6 months. Haha. Anyways, today in this episode, I am going to be covering the history of Manhwa Part 2, where I left off. Can you hear the little excited clappings I'm doing? Just ignore it, never mind. Okay, guys, so in part 1, I introduced you to the pioneers of manhwa, political and social beginnings of the history of manhwa, and how that evolved over time from Korea's liberation under the Japanese occupation until the 70s. I briefly talked about how manhwa bangs really exploded in the 60s and onward, especially due to the censorship of manhwas. And did I just say manhwas? I quit. I meant mangas and all things Japanese, basically, and the negative reputation that manhwas had in general with the government. So, moving on, manhwa banks controlled what was passed on to the customers, and the only works that were being made available were the kind of manhwas that were usually pirated, scanned, redrawn mangas that they felt were the most profitable at the time, or manhwas that were created by popular mangakas of their time, following genres and things that they considered hot at the time. So basically, there was no avenue or space for emerging mangakas and artists. And again, they only chose to put out what they felt was going to be profitable for these rental shops and whatnot. And of course, at that time, the censorship laws were being more enforced, and so much so that the manhwa ban started to take a bad hit. Now, some of the materials that were made available to customers also came from comic magazines, and these comic magazines would also provide material for reprinting these serials, which made for an opportunity for publishers to make money. So in the 80s, we see several comic magazines come to fruition, such as the weekly IQ Jump, monthly Treasure Island for children, and Comic Square, which cater to adults. For those into romance, in 1988, Renaissance Comics was created. We also see the founding of Nine magazine that catered to women comics. Its founder was Hwang Nima, who was a comic artist herself and popular for the manhwa series Ionian Blue Star and Goodbye, Mr. Black. She's known as the godmother of romance manhwas. At this time, we also see works created by Kim Soo-jung's Dooley the Little Dinosaur and all his little adventures. He's kind of goofy little green dinosaur. So cute. Anyways, and we see dramatic works such as those created by Lee Young-se when he created a very popular series called A Daunting Team. It was also translated to Alien Baseball Team, or it came out in the English release as Untouchables. But one interesting translation was The Terrifying Mercenary Baseball Team, which personally I really get a kick out of. I really like it because for some reason I conjure up a picture of Majima having his own baseball team. Anyways, entering the 90s, there was so much going on in Korea politically at the time. I'm not going to be able to delve into all of the depth of it and how it affected manhwa history because I'll be here forever. I will say that the government set up various ethnic committees that enforced censorship laws and banned under the youth protection law, and manhwas were deemed a dangerous influence to the youth due to its depictions of violence and sexually explicit content, so much so like book burnings took place. Artists and creators were either taken to court and or fined. So, as previously mentioned, this affected manhwa banks significantly because these ethnic committees banned these manhwa banks from being operated 200 meters from any kind of school building, which basically targeted their major customer demographic. And in spite of all this, we still see popular and controversial works being produced, including pieces by, once again, Lee Hyung-se, He made a series called Nambu War Stories in 1994 and a very controversial piece called Mythology of the Heavens in 1997. Now, this piece caused him to be fined for explicit sexual depictions and themes. At least that's what the government considered it. Now, something about the main character that I heard, or that I read rather in my research, was about the character having sex with a snake and her having his babies, and I think he killed them all, but I'm not sure if it's implied that they had sex or if it's actually depicted. I haven't delved deep into confirming that information. If y'all know, you can, just drop a comment in the box and let me know. But either way, the government was not happy. So back in 1995, we see works created by Kim Jae-hwan, with the series Rainbow and Combat Metal Hemosu. I could be killing it, but it's okay. That came out in 1997. I know I'm flip-flopping back and forth with dates, so just know it happened in the 90s, okay? Now, in the upcoming decade, Kim Jae-won would make a contribution to the manhwa rendition of World of Warcraft series. Now, I want to talk about two big events that took place in the 90s that affected the manhwa industry. The first one happened in 1997, which was the Asian financial crisis. And the second one happened in 1998, which was the beginning of the lift on the ban of Japanese culture. Now, the Asian financial crisis, like so many other things in daily life at the time, caused many people to lose jobs and not being able to even afford to buy physical manhwas, let alone continue to rent them. Now, a year later, as things started to slowly progress during the crisis, Kim Dae-jung, the president at the time, signed an agreement that the ban on Japanese culture and media would be lifted. The lift on the ban took place in 4 stages, but it was at stage 1, among a list of other allowed media, that imports on mangas were being allowed once again. Now, this was both bad and good. Buying was still not an option because of the financial crisis, so sales plummeted. Now, with the comeback of mangas, the economy not fully recovered yet, gave the manhwa publishers a run for their money in terms of popularity and business. But with the rise in technology, aka the internet, people were scanning, translating, and uploading mangas to online sites. No need to rent or buy anymore, which caused even more problems for the manhwa industry, as even rental shops and publishers were closing. However, as bad as it was for copyright purposes, keep in mind that censorship was still a thing, and comics still had a negative reputation as having detrimental influences on society and especially the youth. So, and of course, eventually copyright infringement issues surfaced, adding more problems. So, with all this going on and more, not much original material was being produced, and the manhwa industry was at a semi standstill, if you'll say. Between the mid 90s into the early aughties, aka 2000s, web portal search engines ventured out into creating online manhwas, or currently known as webtoons. As a side note, I want to make mention, and just to be clear, that webcomics came out in the US as well in the late 80s and 90s, not to be confused with webtoons, which is a South Korean originally created concept out of the rise of South Korea's economic crisis and censorship laws. That includes formatting, structure, other details that separate the two even further. Don't, in other words, compare the two because they're different. As of today, though, things have changed in the world of webtoons because they're not being made by Koreans anymore. There are non-Korean authors and illustrators that are producing webtoons through these platforms. But that is a whole different topic and probably for another episode. Anyways, let's get back to these search engines and portals. Now, there was a bunch of them at the time that started to produce a lot of these OG webtoons. But for the sake of this episode, I'm going to focus primarily on 2 popular companies. And I don't know if I'm saying it right, Daum and Naver. Although I will say that Chalyun, I could be pronouncing it wrong again, webtoon, which was in the 90s, was the first to coin the term webtoon. However, their media was read horizontally. from left to right, emulating print manhwas. Some of these earlier sites pushed online content that were initially only accessible if you purchased the title, and that probably even included like scans. But e-commerce was still new and very iffy in the 90s, so things didn't exactly pan out very well. It was also in the 90s that we see a huge movement called the Korean Wave, or Hallyu. And this wave of Korean portal, have mercy, of Korean influences included music and films, but also the emergence of webtoons. So around 2002 of sorts, one of South Korea's popular web portal, Daum, launched its World in Comics. That's what it was called, with the subsequent change that eventually turned into Daum Webtoon a year later. Naver, a search portal, ventured in-house and created South Korea's Naver Webtoon, which was founded by Kim Jong-koo. At this time, though, Naver Webtoon began to grow exponentially, outperforming Daum in serialized pieces and popularity. Also, in 2013, another webtoon platform emerges called Lessing Comics, launching its Android app, as did Daum Webtoon. 2 years later, Lessing Comics launches its English and Japanese language services in the US and Japan. Now, Lessing is a pay-to-read service, and it turned out to be very successful at the time, and it still is. So, beginning with the explosion of one of its titles called Bad Boss by author and artist Niam B. Side note, as opposed to manga prints, webtoons evolve from horizontal to vertical on-scrolling, like you would typically online in general, right? You would just scroll vertically. And it made sense, especially because it was also made for reading easier on mobile devices. And if you haven't noticed, unlike mangas, manhwas, whether in print or as webtoons, are mostly in color. Now, as far as themes, even though there are a lot of genres in manhwas, a lot of times, and not all the time, but a lot of times it covered a lot of social issues that were happening in Korea. And it kind of makes sense because that was like how it took off in the very beginning, right? Political and social issues. But you will still see social themes in a lot of manhwas. Another thing that can be noted about manhwas versus mangas is there is almost always one main protagonist, especially like in, shonen kind of type genre. I forgot the name of it in Korea, but and if you notice in mangas, every time it is not every time, but a lot of times there is individual people, but it's almost always a group, like Jujutsu Kaisen, there's like a group of characters and they always work as a team, and then you have One Piece and then you have Naruto, blah, blah, blah. But a lot of times in manhwas or webtoons, it's always one main character and only that one main character with a few side characters, but the side characters do not co-dominate necessarily, anyways, co-dominate the storyline. Of course, that is not written in stone, but it's just something that I've noticed, and that has been mentioned in the majority of webtoons created. Okay, carrying on. We see Naver Webtoon soon discovered that fan translations of their webtoons were coming out, and its founder, Kim, realized there was a huge need to cater to their international audiences. So in 2014, Naver Webtoon, operating out of South Korea, expanded to Line Webtoon for the US and Europe. Naver operated Line, which was a popular messaging app in Asia similar to that of WhatsApp. It wasn't long before Webtoon reached to well over 60 countries. And in 2014, Daum and Kakao Incorporated merged, creating Daum Kakao. Never mind. And at some point, Daum Webtoon continued to release webtoons and web novels, but Kakao Page, which is another portal from the company, focused only on web novels specifically. Daum Kakao later rebranded as Kakao and eventually went from Daum Webtoon to Kakao Webtoon. And then merger after merger after merger, we see the rebranding of what is now called Kakao Entertainment Corporation, or most just widely known as Kakao Entertainment. So while we're talking about growth and changes in mergers, in 2019, we see that Line Webtoon becomes Webtoon, just all caps. And a year later, the Naver Webtoon Corporation becomes its new service provider. The rebranding that took place for Kakao Webtoon also happened in 2020. The following year, 2021, the Naver Webtoon Corporation acquired Wattpad, becoming Wattpad Webtoon Studios, while Kakao acquired Tapas and Radish. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with Tapas, it's a webtoon and prose publishing platform, while Radish, turned into now called Radish Fiction, is a serialized fiction app, both of which are paid to read services. Webtoon also recently released its own fiction app called Yonder, where you can read bits at a time of curated works from various popular authors. But webtoons have exploded in such popularity that even film and TV series adaptations were made, even anime adaptations. And originally, some of these creators began publishing their webtoons on their own website back in the heyday before they became serialized. But before I start to mention some of these amazing creators whose works became super popular during the early aughties, aka 2000s again, and beyond, I want to say that there's a huge chance I'm going to miss quite a bit. I cannot possibly cover every single one, obviously, but I'm going to do my best to give credit to these OG creators. So I apologize if I don't mention a specific creator or artist and their works. Since the list of contributions is insane, I am going to try to fly by them. Yes, I'm going to kill names, and I apologize. So we're going to start off with one of the first ones that came up in my research, which was Kwang Jun-ju, which is Snowcat. She made Snowcat in 2001, everyday life of this adorable, funky-looking white cat. And then there was Yu Suk-il, which I'm so sorry, came out with Marine Blue in 2001, and that received an adaptation to an online gaming site in '06, and then later an Android game in 2012. Now, Kang Do-ha was famous for The Great Gatsby in 2005 and The Romance Killer in 2006. Now, one of the OG webtoon creators, which has been recognized as very first gen and just huge contribution to the history of webtoons, is Kang Fu. Now, his works, I cannot possibly cover every single one, but a lot of his works came out with a lot of adaptations, and mostly film. Some of them was Sunjung Manhwa, aka Love Story, and that came out in 2003, and it received an adaptation called Hello Schoolgirl in 2008. Now, there is Fool, which Babo, I think it is, or Babu, it is another name for it, Fool, and another webtoon called Apartment, and that came out in 2004. Apartment got a film in '06, and Fool, which was known as The Miracle of a Giving Fool, had a show, or I mean, a film in 2008. He came out with Timing in '05. He almost came out with a piece almost every year, no joke. Timing came out in '05, 26 years in '06. That got a film in 2012. Another piece called I Love You in 2007 came out with a film in 2010. And I believe if it's the same one, they may have did another, like a remake of a film last year. Then there's another piece called The Neighbors in 2008, and that got a film in 2012. Another piece called Again that came out in 2009. Every Moment of Your Life in 2010. Lamp Shop 2011. Witch 2013. And Moving 2015, and that got a TV series which is currently airing on Disney Plus. I think it's still airing, but it did come out on Disney Plus. And a lot of these pieces that he did again have and either have or are still coming out with a film adaptation. So the next 30 titles, I'm going to try to go by real fast and show you the adaptations to these very popular webtoons. Now, some of them didn't come out with an adaptation until a couple of years after their release. Most of these are already completed. Only a few are still ongoing. So, first up, Get On B, if I'm saying that wrong, I'm sorry, came out 2006 with Immortal Regis and the sequel Cavalier of the Abyss. They also did another piece in 2012 called Field Trip. Song Ji-ho and Lee Kwang-so came out with a super popular Noblesse in 2007 to 2019, which translated to English and one of the first webtoons serialized on the then line webtoon, now just webtoon. They had an ONA by Production IG, which is a Japanese company, and an anime adaptation aired on Crunchyroll. Ji Kang-min, Welcome to Convenience Store, 2008, and had an animated series in 2012. Yoon Tae-ho, Moss, 2008, Inside Man, 2010, Mi-sang, Incomplete Life, 2012. Film adaptations for Moss and Mi-sang is actually a series on Netflix, and a film for Inside Men, 2015. Ju Dong-kyun, Now at Our School came out in 2009 and currently on a Netflix series under the title of All of Us Are Dead. Now, Sun Ki did Cheese in the Trap in 2010. Came out with a TV series in 2016 on TVN, and then there was a film in 2018 by CGV Theaters. Then we have Lee Jung-hoi, aka SIU, who created super popular Tower of God in 2010, and it came out on Crunchyroll, this animated series. And then Lee Kwang-ha, The Sound of Magic, Anaru Samanara, or something like that, which is basically abracadabra. It came out in 2010, and now there's a Netflix musical series that came out last year. I'm not sure if it's ongoing or not, but then there is Park Young-ji, The God of High School, 2011 anime series which aired on Crunchyroll. Sok-woo came out with Orange Marmalade in 2011 to 2013, and they had a TV series in 2015. Lee So-young came out with Yeonmo in 2011, and it initially was a manhwa turned webtoon under the title The King's Affection, which I believe is on Netflix right now. Kim Jio-yu-sam, Pegasus Market, came out in 2011, 2013, and was a TV series in 2019. Mass Star came out with a very popular piece called Untouchable in 2014. It was adapted into a Chinese series in 2017, and her other works were one called 2012 If the Earth Was Destroyed and My Girlfriend is a Real Man, which came out in 2018. I think that one's still ongoing. Chung Kyo-young did Love Alarm in 2014, currently airing on Netflix. Jun Sok came out with The Sound of Your Heart in 2014, which later became a TV series in 2016. Lee Dong-gong came out with a super popular Yumi's Cells in 2015, and they made a TV series in 2021. Now, the username Winter created a piece in 2015 called Love and Leashes, which is also on Netflix, recommended for 15 and plus, because love and leashes. Next, Chogong came out with Solo Leveling in 2016, and it will have an anime adaptation aired in Crunchyroll, but that is yet to be announced. Jimengi, My ID is Gangman Beauty, which came out in 2016, also is also on Netflix. Cho Kwang Jin, Itaewon Class came out in 2016, also on Netflix. Heihua and Narak, which is the illustrator, came out with A Business Proposal in 2017, also has Netflix series, which I'm definitely going to watch that. Rama came out with Tomorrow in 2017. You can watch it on Netflix. Kim Gambi and Kwon Yong Chang came out with Sweet Home 2017, also Netflix series. Jang Yi, The Uncanny Counter came out in 2018, also Netflix series. Youngji, um, which created in 2018 super popular True Beauty. It was a TV series in 2020. It is set to have an anime production by Studio N, which is a subsidiary of Naver Webtoon. And I think it was last week. So this year they launched a mobile game. Um, Continuing. Jang Yi, July Found by Chance, which is on Netflix under the title Extraordinary You. CRT and Kim Gyo Sam or Kim Jiwayo Sam, Vigilante, which came out in 2018 to 21, and they will be making a film if I'm correct, and it's yet to be announced. Beijing So did Money Game in 2018, which turned into an American reality show on YouTube's channel called Jubilee. Park Tae-jun did another super popular series called Lookism, and they did a web series in 2019 and an animation released on Netflix. Sang Ho Young and Choi Jiwai Suk did Hellbound in 2019 and currently on Netflix. So we see how webtoons exploded, so much so receiving so much attention, and so many adaptations from the excellent quality of storytelling that surfaced since its creation due to the financial crisis and censorship laws and the ban of Japanese content. I have to say that I literally fell into a rabbit hole when I did the research for the history of Manhwa, and it was just so intriguing, and it was so hard actually to filter out so much information and just trying to stick to the very important pieces. And at the same time, discovering a lot of the foundation of Korea and how it really started with oppression during the colonial Japanese era, and then the things that they suffered during the Korean War, and a lot of, the crazy political regimes and all this other stuff, and it just kind of goes to show not just like history of Korea and where manhwa originated from or why it came out, how it started as a political voice and so forth, but it also tells me personally the things that the Korean people were able to overcome. So yeah, I mean, a little side note too. Part of the rabbit hole pit that I fell in was during the Korean War section, and the research that I did in that was because my father was in the Korean War, and just an interesting little tidbit. And so I ended up being a little bit more slightly engulfed when it came to that and how political cartoons started really blowing up at that time and whatnot. But anyways, all that basically to say it was very educational, very eye-opening for me. And the next history, quote unquote, is going to be the history of Manhua, Manhua, Chinese comics, and I will probably be also touching on Hong Kong and maybe some other parts of Asia. But that episode is going to take a hot minute for sure. Maybe this time really 6 months. I don't know. Hopefully not. But the research that I've been delving into so far, it's a lot. It's a lot, and it's just having to condense it is such a pain because there's just so much good stuff. But for now, I'm going to end this episode, and I just want to thank my listeners, whoever's just giving a chance to hear this out. I hope you got good stuff out of this as much as I did. And I will be coming up with another episode while I'm working on the history of Chinese comics. So you're not going to wait 6 months for that one. I will be dishing out stuff periodically while I'm doing my research. If anybody has any suggestions, comments, or whatever, please feel free to do that. And if you enjoy this material, if you find this different but yet interesting, you know what to do, guys, right? Thumbs up, subscribe, blah, blah, blah. So stay tuned for the next coming episode. I'm going to be talking about very specifically a manhwa I won't say but recently finished reading, and I love it so much. And it is just one that I would absolutely fangirl scream, hang over the chandeliers if they had an anime adaptation or even a film adaptation. I'd be a little bit more picky with the film, but it is just so good. Anyways, until then, be good, do good. Ciao.